Today's lesson today is actually Christmas, okay? But in a way of this, the greatest story ever told. We're getting, Christmas specials and everything, and of course, be sure and watch the greatest Christmas special of all time, the Charlie Brown Christmas, where Linus gets up there and says, let me tell you what, still. That and Little Drummer Boy, just kidding me. But this way, today's lesson ties in with a lot of stuff that we've talked about through the years. And I just want to go through this to remind us as we come up on the Christmas season that the greatest story ever told has a lot of other parts to it. And we are part of that story, but the story is much bigger and goes in different directions that we're not aware of at times because God is working worldwide. Okay? And we are part of that and just want to show this through history. Now, let's get back to Jonah, one of my favorite guys, but I just want to give you some timelines here. Jonah, that was 785 BC. Okay? So remember Jonah. God comes to him and says, I want you to go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it because its wickedness has come before me. And he says, I don't think so. Now, the example I've always given you in the past is this would have been equivalent to God appearing to you on September 12th, 2001, and saying, go preach to ISIS. Or in today, it would be God appearing to someone in Israel and saying, I want you to go preach to Hamas in Gaza. Okay? And Jonah's response was, I don't think so. And he heads for Tarshish. Now, just to give you an idea, he was in Israel. Nineveh was fairly close. Tarshish was literally at the end of the known world. He is going to try and get away from God. And of course, we know the story. That didn't work out so well for him. Okay? So he heads out. The storm hits. They think they're all going to die. The guys on the boat start talking, and he goes, yeah, it's me. I upset the one God. And they're like, are you just bonkers? And so they toss him over the side, and he gets a fish. And he's there 3 days and 3 nights, a foreshadowing of Christ. And he repents, and he's cast out, and we're going to try this again. Take 2. And the word of the Lord came to him again and said, let's try this again. Go preach to them. And he obeys. Okay, but just a little side, he obeys. Much like, this is like junior high, where you told your kid to do something, they disobeyed, you punished them, you had to repeat this again, they do it. Are they doing it willingly and with a smiling face? Or are they just going to do the absolute minimum required? If they were being punished for not cleaning their room, they're going to clean the room. Everything just gets shoveled into the closet, that type thing. It's a similar type thing. Jonah began, this is a large city, took 3 days to go through it, and he began by going a day's journey. He's like, okay, I'm going to go in a third of the way. This is enough. And sort of preaches just half-heartedly. And guess what? They repented. And they repent. And they actually say, okay, no, we have done wrong. And the king commands everyone to repent in sackcloth and ashes. And they do. And when God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. Just want to remember that for a minute, because now, Jonah's not too happy either. Because Jonah, to this was very wrong. I want my enemies punished. God, this isn't right. I don't know if you remember, but after 9/11, when we went back to war again, there was a statement that they were asking General Schwarzkopf, and they said, what about forgiveness for those who had perpetrated 9/11? And Schwarzkopf looks at him and says, I believe in forgiveness, and I believe God forgives, and it's my job to set up a meeting between ISIS and God as soon as possible. Okay? And that's how we're all feeling too. So we're like Jonah here. Well, God, couldn't you have forgiven them after you destroyed Nineveh? Okay? And God's going, wait a minute. This isn't right. And so it's hot, so he has a plant grow up and shade him, and Jonah's liking this, and it is hot in the Middle East, and then the plant dies, and he's like, oh, great, just kill me now. And just this in. God says, is it right for you to be angry? And just like your kid, yes. It's not fair. The classic phrase of every human being, it's just not fair. And God says, look, You've been concerned about this plant. What about the people in Nineveh, 120,000, who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? I throw this out to you because many times when people are criticizing Christianity and God and like, they talk about the things that happened in the Old Testament. The peoples that the Israelites did slay going through. And they say, that's a vindictive God. No, it's a punishing God who had decided after periods of time someone needed to be punished. But remember this phrase. This is Nineveh, at the time the biggest city in the world. And God's sitting there going, look, these people don't know their left hand from the right. I'm going to give them every chance I can. But still the choice is theirs. And if they choose right, I will turn to them. I want you to remember that because that's just a foreshadowing of basically what the Christmas story is. God's giving us another chance. Now, Nineveh is built on two hills. This is the Mount of Jonah, because yes, Jonah did have a big impact. Okay, and Nineveh is there right up north of Mosul. There's the Temple Mount that has the old palace and like, and then there's the Mount of Jonah. This is the tomb of Jonah, or I should say this was the tomb of Jonah. Because ISIS had a field day, okay? But that was it. Now, Jonah obeyed God, even reluctantly, and not as well as we might would have liked. And I throw this out to us to remember, that we must serve God to the best of our abilities, and we're not perfect, and sometimes we're not going to do it that greatly. And still, God's like, I can work with that. Jonah is known and respected by 3 religions, encompassing 55% of the world's population. Not bad for a guy who didn't want to do his job. Okay? Because of this, and we'll get into this later, God used this to spread Christianity throughout Asia, and all because of one guy. And it reminds us that we can do anything through Christ who strengthens us. Okay? Now, for those of you have been here before, for those of you who are watching online, this story always means a lot to me because the Israelites, the Israelites in not having Assyria destroyed, and then they came back. Assyria did eventually go back to its evil ways. God did destroy the Assyrians in the Assyrian nation. Okay? But, as we're going to see a little bit later, what God did then means that me and my children exist today. I'm just going to throw that out to you. Some of you have been in class before, you know where I'm going. For those of you who may be watching online and don't, you'll see this in a minute. Okay? But it's only because of Jonah that I'm standing here in front of you today. Now, Zoroaster. And there's some debate academically as to when he actually was born and lived. At the latest, it could be 625 BC. There are some documents and like showing us it could have been as early as 2000 BC. Okay. Now, Zoroaster was a pagan priest. Okay. And he was doing purification rituals to perform the ceremonies for the multiple deities that he was a priest for, when he received a vision from God, who he referred to as the Ahura, and God gave him a vision and said, there is only one God, and who you are serving is not it. It is me. And so Zoroaster left his priestly duties, he left his monies and like, and he went and began preaching monotheism. And this became Zoroastrianism. Depending upon when it started and structured, this makes it the oldest monotheistic faith on earth. Now, notice, I'm not saying that Zoroaster was born before Abraham. I'm saying that Zoroastrianism was structured before Judaism was structured. So in other words, Zoroastrianism was there as a monotheistic religion before the Jews came out of Egypt and were given the 10 Commandments. Okay? Now, he was a priest who saw from Ahura Mazda. What he preached was the Ahura is the creator of heaven and earth, everything material, everything spiritual, and he is the center of everything. At the beginning of the time, the world was divided into dominions of good and evil. Basically, everything was good, and then Ahriman, which is the equivalent of Satan, came and brought evil into the world. Okay? And that's what we're dealing with now. And that people must choose, and they will choose good or evil. And because we have free will on our choices, we will be judged because of that. The righteous will spend eternity with the Ahura, and the unrighteous will spend eternity in hell with Ahriman. Now, Zoroastrianism. Here's the basics of Zoroastrianism. It is summed up in one phrase: good thoughts, good words, good deeds. Now, that should be familiar to all of us, because what does the New Testament teach us? From a person's heart, evil things and sin come from. And Jesus was, getting back on the Pharisees going, look, guys, it's not about what you're eating and how you're eating. The sin comes from inside. Okay? And Zoroastrianism had a similar concept: good thoughts, good words, good deeds. The Zoroastrian golden rule was very similar to the Jewish golden rule, which was do not do unto others whatever is injurious to yourself. So Judaism is a similar type of thing. In Christianity, it's stated positively: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Okay? The fundamental feature of Zoroastrian moral code is to be good and do good. And all Zoroastrians were expected to do that. Now, they also had fire temples. In fact, the oldest fire temple is in Yazd, Iran, still now. It's still going after thousands of years. It's not that they worship fire, but fire was seen as a symbol of the Ahura and purity. And ironically, this brought up an issue for them because they sought to be pure in all things, not to defile fire or the earth or themselves or everything else. Then the issue became, what do you do with dead people? And they got around this by building towers of silence. And these are big towers that you would, during the funeral service, you would take your loved ones, place the body up there, and the birds, the carrion birds, would come and pick the bones clean, and then you could bury the bones. Okay? But the point is they were trying to be pure in all things. Now, in Zoroastrianism, one of the biggest sins is lying. In fact, the word for evil is to lie. Okay? And they basically had a phrase such as, let your yes be yes, your no be no. Everything else comes from Ahriman. And if that sounds familiar to you as New Testament Christians, that's true as well. History is broken into three sections. The creation. Ahura created everything good. Then the section we're in. Ahriman came, brought evil in the world, and we got to deal with evil right now. And the third section of life will be when the Messiah returns, and evil is overcome, and everything is put right. Okay? Now, you have more to do with Zoroastrianism than you might think. This is the wedding ceremonies, and I'm just going to go through this because this is still held in Persia, in Iran today, and my daughters are still terrified because it's going to happen to them too. Okay? The first is Kastagari, which is basically asking for the intended's hand. Now, in the old days, the families got together and worked through all this, but today it's still seen in what you gentlemen have to do by going to the gal's family and go talking to dear old dad and going, I'd like your permission to marry your daughter. And dear old dad goes, yeah, I don't think so. Okay? I remember the movie Battleship, which was very bad. If you haven't seen it, don't see it. But at the end of it, the hero goes to the admiral whose daughter he's been dating, and he says, Admiral, I want your permission to marry your daughter. And the admiral says, no. And he looks at him and says, sir, I've literally just saved the world. The world is one thing. My daughter is entirely another. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. That's it. Well, this is it. You still got to ask Dad for it. Then comes Pehle Barun, all right? And this is where you have a party, it's a big dinner, and you're basically telling everyone, we're engaged now, and you're setting the date. And so when my mother and father got engaged, similar thing, her parents threw this big party, and you are sitting there, it's food. It's like you're married, but you're not. You are married except you're not sleeping together. Okay. And his dad told me the joke, he's sitting there and, the food is going and you're sitting on the ground on these Persian carpets and he's going through all this. And he said, I looked at your mother and I said, wow, it's like we're married already. And she just looked at me and said, don't get any ideas. Okay? Because we're not. All right. Now, this is the stage Joseph and Mary were at. Okay? They were engaged, but they hadn't been officially married and consummated marriage. And that's why when she shows up pregnant, he's like, what's going on here? Now, there's the next stage after that. which this is what my girls are terrified of, but it's happening, okay? And that is the fact that you have to agree on what we would call the dowry. The woman gets a dowry from the man, and it's hers. It can't be touched. Because the concept is, if anybody's going to mess this up, it's going to be the guy. And so the dowry is there to protect the woman no matter what, okay? And, my girls are like, are you going to do that? I'm like, yeah. These boys show up and say, I want to marry your daughter. I'm like, you love my daughter? Yeah. How much do you love my daughter? And like, Dad, Shirley and I'm like, oh, yeah, And then this that you may not be aware of, gold wedding rings. That's right. Look down at your hand. You can thank the Zoroastrians for that. Because again, gold is a symbol of purity, and they gave gold rings as a symbol of an oath, an unbreakable oath. And so that's why we have gold wedding rings today. See, you didn't know you were so Zoroastrian. Okay? Now, Judah is taken into captivity in 605 BC, and they remain in Babylonian and Persian captivity until 536. Okay? So notice, this area, the Persian Empire, is Zoroastrian at this time. Zoroastrianism is the religion, and Judah's been brought into this. This means that Judaism and Zoroastrianism interact for the first time and learn from each other. Now, for this next slide, I just want to be perfectly clear. This is the gospel according to Edmund. I am not inspired. I am not stating this is what Scripture states. That I do not claim to speak from God. I'm merely saying this is what I think was going on. I think God was using this to tell the Jews, these people aren't even my chosen people, and they get me better than you do right now. All right? You're being punished for a reason. Okay? But Zoroastrians also learned from the Judeans as well, and that's what we're going to get into. Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great created the Persian Empire. And Cyrus was born in 590 BC, lived until 529. He was a Zoroastrian. He created the Medo-Persian Empire, and just to give you a structure of this, it was the world's largest empire until the Roman Empire at its height. It was still bigger than most of the Roman Empire for most of its time. The Roman Empire finally exceeded it, but this was big. And he conquered everybody. In 538 BC, according to Ezra and Nehemiah, he returned the Jews to Jerusalem and rebuilt Jerusalem. He is the only non-Hebrew in Scripture to be given the title Messiah. Okay? Because Messiah means deliverer. Right? And in Isaiah 45, he's referred to that. Greek historian Xenophon stated that he honored his subjects and cared for them as that they were his children, and they, on their part, revered Cyrus as a father. Thomas Jefferson had 2 copies of that book because he thought a lot of Cyrus as well. Now, the Cyrus cylinder is a statement that he sent out through all the lands, because he didn't just free the Judeans to go back, and the Israelites, but everybody. The original's in the British Museum in London, and a copy of it is in New York at the United Nations. It is considered the world's first Bill of Human Rights. So, okay, this didn't come out as big as I'd like, but it says at the beginning, I have put on the crown of the kingdom of Iran, Babylon, and the nations of the 4 corners of the earth. Okay? With the help of the Ahura, I announce that I will respect the traditions, customs, and religions of the nations of my empire, and never let any of my governors and subordinates look down or insult them while I'm alive. From now on, I will impose my monarchy on no nation. Each is free to accept it, and if any one of them rejects it, I will not war on them to reign. While I'm the king of Iran, Babylon, and the nations of the 4 directions, I will never let anyone oppress any others, and if it occurs, I will take his or her right back and penalize the oppressor. I will never let anyone take possession of movable or landed properties of others by force or without compensation. While I live, I prevent unpaid forced labor. Today, I announce that everyone is free to choose a religion. People are free to live in all regions and take up a job, provided they never violate someone else's rights. No one will ever be penalized for his or her relatives' faults. I prevent slavery, and my governors and subordinates are obliged to prohibit exchanging men and women as slaves within their ruling domains. Such traditions should be exterminated the world over. I implore Ahura to make me succeed in fulfilling my obligations to the nations of Iran, Babylon, and the ones of the four corners. So this is what's considered the first Bill of Human Rights. And again, he stated this because he was Zoroastrian and had those beliefs. And even though he ran the world's biggest empire, this is his tomb. Nothing big. Literally, not that big. And all the statement on it says, "O man, I am Cyrus, who acquired the empire of the Persians and the king of Asia. Grudge me not, therefore, my monument." No gold, just simple and humble. Now, the Magi, Zoroastrianism, had a priestly caste. Their job was to guide the people and search for the Messiah. Okay? To continue to encourage the people to be honest and trustworthy and serve the Ahura and to eschew evil and to wait for the Messiah. The Magi were priests and astronomers, not kings and astrologers. Okay? I know we've got the Christmas carols. We three kings of Orient are. Sorry, it upsets me in my heritage. Okay, but I'm not triggered. But they're actually not referred to as kings anywhere in Christian literature until about AD 600. Okay? But, we got Christmas carols and marketing and, things happen. Because of the time Judah spent in Persia, the Zoroastrians would have known about the prophecies of the Messiah from Judaism. That's what the cross-pollination does. They understand the prophecies in Isaiah and elsewhere. So, when the star appears, the Magi, who are Zoroastrian priests, say, "Aha, this is the Messiah." And they go. Now, this is the story, this is what's taught about Christmas in Iran. Okay? There were three gifts, right? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And from that's why we get there were three kings. No, we're not told how many kings. We just know two or more. But there were three gifts. Why these three gifts? In Iran, you were taught that there were three gifts that the wise men took. Gold, because that represented kingship. Okay? Frankincense, signifying being a priest or a high priest. And myrrh was used not just in medicine, but also was an embalming fluid for like a sacrifice. Okay? So that, representing being a doctor or actually being sacrificing for others. And the reason these gifts were taken is because the wise men would see which gift the child would reach out for, which would symbolize what they would be: a king, a priest, or redeemer. And the child reached for all three. Okay? Now, this is Assyria in the time of Jonah. Okay? So notice up there at the top right, you see Nineveh up there? Okay, I got a Nineveh right here. Well, that's not showing up there. Sorry. There's Nineveh. Okay? You see the Caspian Sea up in the upper right-hand corner? Come on, it's back there. Upper right-hand corner? Okay, so you see it. Now, in between the Caspian Sea and Nineveh, there's those two little blue lakes. See those? The one to the lower right. That's Lake Ermia. Okay? Amanda? Gretchen's right back there. Sorry, she's right there. Okay, so that's Lake Ermia. All right? So you see it's not that far from Nineveh. Okay? And Nineveh is in present-day Iraq. Okay? Ermia is in present-day Iran. Right? So just want to get through this. Because I need you to know physically, geographically, what's going on. So in the first century, remember, the Mount of Jonah is still there in Nineveh, but in the first century, apostles come out and they start preaching the gospel. And the Assyrians, remember Jonah. And the Assyrians are the first nations to convert en masse to Christianity. Okay? They're the first to convert en masse. The Assyrian church expanded, sent missionaries throughout the entire area, setting up churches far away, even throughout China. So, here's the big picture. So here's Iraq over here. That's where the Assyrians were. And into Iran. All right. And so the Assyrian church sends missionaries out everywhere, even out all through China. And in fact, we found stelae all throughout China of these churches that were built and through the times. And basically, Christianity had spread all through China up until the Mongol Empire shows up. And the Mongols, well, they just killed everybody. I mean, they were destroying everybody. And so people had to flee. And they fled south, because you see Mongolia up there, and it drove everybody through China, and they fled south, up through the mountains into northern Burma and Vietnam and all this. Now, the Assyrian church have been very successful, and I'm very grateful for Jonah, because my mother is Persian, or was, I mean, she's dead now, but she was Persian by nationality, but Assyrian by ethnicity. And so if Jonah hadn't gone to Nineveh, the Assyrians wouldn't have converted, Mom wouldn't have been a believer, Dad wouldn't have married her, and I would not be here. Okay? So I am grateful, because when the verse says, it is through him that we live and breathe and have our very being, I and my children are walking examples of this. Okay? Now, a couple years ago, I teach in China in the business schools, and I'm flying back, and sitting next to me is a Baptist missionary who is a vocational missionary, and they had spent a couple weeks getting up into the mountains of northern Burma and Vietnam to preach the gospel. And he said, we were the first Westerners to get up in those places, and we get there, and we're in these villages, and they already know the Bible. And we got no clue how this happened. I said, I can fill you in on that. Okay? I know how. All right? So this is what's going on. And the Assyrian church is expanding there. Now, that's important, because one of the Magi that came to Jesus had a fire temple in Ermia. Remember where Ermia is? That lake up there. Because once the apostles got to Assyria and the church is expanding towards China and everywhere, they're expanding all directions. And so they go up to Ermia. In the first century, Thaddeus travels to Ermia, preaches the gospel, and this Magi hears about Christ being crucified and resurrected. And he realizes, this is the same Messiah that I came to. And so he converts to Christianity and turns his fire temple. Remember, it's a fire temple. You never let the fire go out. Okay? And he converts the fire temple into a church, which is the oldest church in Iran and the oldest functional church in the area. Now, this is St. Mary Church in Ermia. That's some of the original portion of it. Probably was go. Now, little history there. Marco Polo visited it, and it's documented in the Travels of Marco Polo. But you probably didn't get that in your high school class. 642 A.D., a Chinese princess named Bafri comes to visit. She redoes part of the church and has her name inscribed in the church wall. Okay? Because again, by this time, Christianity, the Assyrian church has spread this out throughout China. It's everywhere. Okay? 1960 A.D., members of the church get together to reconstruct it and build a spire and the like, and I just put that down because, my family did, my grandparents did that. And this is where my mother and her family would worship in the summer. So this is what it looks like now. Okay? And this is their Christmas service last year. Okay? So, by the way, you may not be able to see it here, but in the Middle East, it is still proper. Women, church services are separated. Women are on the left, men are on the right. You'll notice this one up to the left. Okay, so that's the Christmas service, and it's packed. And you'll notice the one up to the left. And just like us and every other church out there, midweek services are a little more sparsely attended. And this is actually the communion service and the women singing for communion service. Now, so this is, again, the oldest church in Iran. Still functioning after all that time. Started by the Magi, one of the Magi, who had come to worship Jesus. 2 weeks ago, 2 families were visiting this congregation. They had been working with some people here in terms of Let's Start Talking program where we help foreigners work on their English and the like. And they were visiting here. And they came and got me because they were Persian. Okay? They're graduate students studying civil engineering at UTA. And I went up and they're like, oh, you're Persian, and immediately started to try and talk Farsi with me. And I'm like, My Farsi is very rusty. We spoke Assyrian because it said we're Assyrian Ashuri. I was going through. And as soon as I said that, one of the students says, wait a minute, do you know about the church in Urmia? I said, yes, worshipped in the church in Urmia. He goes, I went to undergraduate at Urmia. I went to that church. That was the first time he'd ever been exposed to Christianity. And that's why they came and visited here. So I do all this to tie in all these various lessons that we talk and go through during the year. Okay? And a lot of times we view it as history. And I mean, it is history. Okay? But today, and this time period, as we go through the Christmas story, just remember, that wasn't just a one-time period. God did that to reach out to everyone and to show them Christianity, Christ. I'm sacrificing for you. Okay? And God is still working in ways that sometimes we don't see. Because God works in mysterious ways. But I tell you all this for the following. We never know what the things we're doing, what effect they will have later on. Jesus told us, if you give just a cup of water in my name, that matters. And I just want to try and show you a big picture of where all some of these bits and pieces that we've studied through the year, it all can tie in together with God's will into two people that walked through that door 2 weeks ago. You never know. So I encourage you during this Christmas season to enjoy the holidays. Enjoy it with your family and with your friends and the people around. And also remember that you don't know that even the smallest thing that you're doing right now can have huge consequences that you will never know until once you get to heaven. But it's big. We just don't know how big until later on. Okay? Thank you. I kept you late last time. By my clock, the bell should have just rung, but it didn't. So y'all have a good one, and enjoy the holidays. Be safe, and don't eat any of the fruit cake. Is it still just one fruit cake in the world just being passed around to people? I don't know. So we'll see. Y'all have a good one.